is Jane Lewis, an artist from the UK, and she is one of the artists in the Absent Referent exhibition at Tag Gallery. Jane, you've been an artist for a very long time, but you've not always been doing art about animals. I looked at your earlier work. A lot of your work shows people, but you don't start focusing on animals until a bit recently. Well, I mean, how many years ago did you start?
I think it was 2016 when I first began to do animal rights artwork. I probably, among the artists in the show, I'm the most recent to have become vegan. And that happened quite late in life as well. So I've been vegan about seven and a half years. And about 2 years into that, I thought that there was a kind of dissonance between my new politics and the way my work was going. So I began to do quite a lot of animal rights work, and the series called Earthlings, a series of 18 drawings, were the first things I began.
Oh, they were?
Yes. Yes. And the work to do with animal rights probably spans about 5 years, because I began in 2016. I've had other stuff that I've had to do or wanted to do. I had a lot of illness over a couple of years, so that interfered with it. So it's probably worked from about 4 to 5 years.
Okay. Well, that's interesting, because that series was one that I chose to do the reproductions for the show.
Just as an aside, they are going to go into a permanent collection next year in Austria.
In Austria.
So, yeah, it's the Nicholas Treadwell Gallery. He kind of represents me. And he's 85, and he wanted to have his personal collection in a permanent gallery. So these are going to be part of that. So I'm really pleased. And they will show them. They will show them too. They won't just be in a storeroom.
That's really wonderful. That's kind of a rare thing, especially with animal rights artwork like that. Most people, don't want to hang it on their wall, or it's hard images to live with. So that's very interesting. How did he find out about the Earthlings series? Did you know them somewhere else, or?
Well, no, I've known Nick Treadwell a very long time. He was the first gallery I showed with in the UK when I began to show work with commercial galleries. So we go back a long way. We went our different ways for a while. And then I just asked him if he would like them for the collection, and he jumped at the chance. So
what was his reaction, or maybe some of the other people you know in the art world, like gallerists and collectors?
He loves what I'm doing, but I guess it would be hard to show a lot of the work. I've shown a couple of paintings, oil paintings. That one there to my right is called The Sacrificial Machine, and it was accepted for an open exhibition in the UK, and it toured for a year, going to various galleries. So that's an example of one that was accepted. I've even sold a couple, but they are, I think they read more as surreal images that are also about animal rights.
Right. And you do, I mean, a lot of your work is very surrealistic. I noticed you use a lot of these kind of masks that look like kind of theater masks. I was wondering if you could talk about the symbolism in your work of the mask and how it's being used in your work.
I think it has a lot of connotations. I think for myself, if you wear an extravagant costume or mask, you can feel like someone else. I know I've been to masked balls where I felt much less self-conscious behind a mask. So that's part of it, so that I can perhaps convey a different aspect of someone's character through that. I've also been in love with Italy and Venice for many years. I haven't visited for many years, but I used to. And there's a strong tradition of carnival and the mask there. So it comes from that too. A long time ago, I was artist in residence with an opera company. And although they weren't singing through masks, it's a very strange and artificial form of artistic expression that appealed to me. So I don't know if this is a bit vague, but part of me doesn't know why I use them. But there's some of the reasons that I can give.
I was also curious about so in Marine Atrocity, which is one of the show, like the one behind you, there's this little guy. He has like knives for legs, and a fishtail on his head, and a mask, and it's just this creepy little thing that you threw in there. That's just like, what is that, and what does that signify? Those little creatures.
Yeah, when I was doing the drawing, because the full title is Bycatch, a marine atrocity. So it's, you know, the bycatch of the huge fishing trawls. And that figure just happened. I was doing the drawing and I just wanted to put something in the corner. So I drew that. And it's an artist I love is Hieronymus Bosch. And so there's a kind of Bosch influence there, you know, the little grotesque, evil little people that he puts in his paintings. And I wanted that to represent human evil against the animals.
That's kind of what I was seeing it as this, there's a human component, you know, in it, that behind every atrocity like that, there's the human behind it.
Yeah.
Somehow. And the other one, Muzzled, I wanted to ask you about Muzzled. I love that. So first of all, I see like two readings on Muzzled. It could be like a dog racing situation, or it could be a breeding situation, or a dog fighting situation. I mean, there's different ways you could read into that. What was your inspiration for?
It is supposed to be a greyhound, so it's really about dog racing. But of course, there's an overlap because they are pedigree dogs. They are bred. So there's that overlap as well. And the fact that they are, I discovered that they live most of their lives when they're not racing or training, caged. And they're muzzled a lot of the time as well. So that was the impetus for that drawing.
The interesting thing about that drawing is, for me, the hook on that really is just something about that. I mean, it causes all this tension in the piece, because, you know, you feel like that dog just moves, he's gonna rip his ear. What is the symbolism with that?
That again was a bit like the little figure in the with the fish. I was doing the drawing and I just decided I had to put that in as an extra torture for the dog. I've since found that retired, I think, I may be wrong, I think retired greyhounds are used for blood banks for pets.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's kind of a reference to the blood coming out of the ear as well.
Wow. I love all of the Earthling series. Did you, was it based on the movie, or was it just that term, that word just really?
I did very specifically want to use the title Earthlings because the film Earthlings was the reason I went vegan. And so that I felt it was important to use that as the reference point. That was my inspiration. My experience was I watched Earthlings. I didn't know what it was. I'd heard of it. It was on YouTube at the time. I thought, I wonder what this film about animals is, in all innocence. I had to watch it in 2 sessions. I cried all the way through, and I was vegan straight away. So yes, then 2 years later, I thought I've got to put this into my own artwork. So I had to use the title, Earthlings.
It's a really great title, and it really speaks to what that film is about. And why I love that series of yours too is that you touch upon so many different facets of the way that animals are used and exploited, that we don't always think about, like workhorses and fish, you know, bykill, and experimentation on animals and vivisection, and you just touch upon like everything. You know, people think of animal rights, they just think about farm animals, but they don't think about all ways we use and exploit and torture animals. That film though it's hard film to watch without, you know, crying the entire time. It has turned a lot of people vegan, so I think it's a powerful, very powerful film. I think it's interesting. You know, people say like, oh, I could never be vegan, but those are the same people who can't watch like 5 minutes of a slaughterhouse video because, you know, they just don't want to see, we don't want to see what goes on in our
Yes, I suppose that is a natural reaction. It wasn't mine. After seeing Earthlings, I sort of forced myself to watch all sorts of dreadful things. I wanted to inform myself. I wasn't exactly bearing witness because I wasn't there, but it was a form of bearing witness. So trying to find out about all the atrocities that I pushed to the back of my mind for most of my life. And with the Earthling series, I did want to touch on different aspects. There are farmed animals there, but I feel very, very passionately against vivisection, for example. So that had to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, your vivisection pieces are so strong and just so powerful. And again, it's like these subjects, you know, it's really hard a subject for an artist to, I think, tackle because, you know, you are dealing with subjects that people don't want to know about or they don't want to see. They don't want to face the reality of you know, what's going on. And then you have a couple other series in this show, Butchers and Pigs, I believe is, and that's is that part of this? Okay, so you have a couple of videos. We have animal sketches, right? Earthlings,
Let the Animals Live, yeah.
you know, and is a new one, right? You just made that
That's the
one?
most recent. The music is by Vanquish Evil, and it's just one guy actually. He's called I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Fredrik Salgstrom. He's a Swedish musician, and he contacted me, asking me if I wanted to use one of his songs, and I didn't know how to make videos at the time, so I taught myself. So Let the Animals Live is sort of a slideshow, because I didn't know how to do more than that, but I love the song. And then the more recent one is I See You, and I did a series of drawings called Pigs and Butchers, specifically to use in that. And I was doing them during lockdown, and some of the butchers are depicted wearing masks and latex gloves, because I felt very, very strongly that people were sort of hiding behind their masks and latex gloves and not going vegan, which would help to solve the problem of pandemics. So there's a little nudge about that in there as well. I also have a local market that I sometimes shop in. One of the butchers has pigs' heads on shelves displayed, and so if you walk through that bit of the market, you see this kind of horror, and so I put that into the drawings too.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that in that series you have, and I was wondering about that because you have one of the butchers is wearing like a pandemic style mask, all pandemic masks. They look like, and if you were referencing Zuno's, because I believe the same thing, that most pandemics come from animals. 75% of newly discovered pandemics are coming from animals, and before that it was 60% of known pandemics come from animals. So it's our consumption of animals, our exploitation of animals, that is causing these pandemics. And if people were to make that connection, we would hope they would.
And yet people carried on eating meat and dairy regardless. The slaughterhouses didn't close. I have to say I feel rather disillusioned post-pandemic. I think a lot of us do.
How switching from, say, to a more animal-centered view, has that changed, do you think, others' perceptions of you as an artist, or
possibly? It certainly affected my income. But I decided the animal rights work, I would work for nothing. And I do occasionally sell a piece, which surprises me. I'm also at a time of my life where I don't have so much pressure to have to live on what I sell. So that's something. That's something. But well, I have two Facebook pages. I have a personal and a public one, and the public one is my work. And I have noticed that when I post the animal rights images, not a lot of response to it. If I put something else on, far more positive. I'm sure that other artists find the same. I've heard people say, how can you look at those images and draw or paint those images? Doesn't it really upset you? I don't know how you feel about that, but when I'm working on it, I'm just incredibly involved, and I'm thinking of the technical aspects ultimately when I'm working. So it isn't a difficult experience to do it.
I was wondering how you compare the movement of feminism with the movement now with animal rights and animal rights art, because it's a kind of a similar attitude when people say, oh, you're a vegan artist, oh, you're an animal rights artist. Isn't that cute? Isn't that sweet? But it's not treated like, you're kind of even given this label, animal rights artist or animal rights activist or ecofeminist or vegan. How do you see those movements, and how do you see them align, or do you see them a similarity there?
When I was in that exhibition, it was 1980, it was a long time ago, I was very young. It was called Women's Images of Men, and it was in central London. It was very, very controversial at the time. But for me, it kind of kick-started my career, unbelievably, to be in something like that. And women artists have become, are taken more seriously, obviously, now. But you're right about animal rights artists. I think it will go mainstream, but how long will it take? I don't know. I think eventually the work that artists like ourselves are doing will be in galleries, will be in museums. But we're at the beginning, I think. We're at the beginning of that. I mean, your show, the show that you've organised, is fantastic. It's a real step in the right direction. It really is. Another thing is that the vegan movement, I believe, is about 75% female. More women than men are involved. So we've got this sort of double thing going on, that not only are we animal rights artists, but we're women animal rights artists. So that could be a double put down. When I read Carol Adams' book, I just thought, wow, these parallels are, well, really, they should be obvious, shouldn't they? They really, really should. The oppression of women, the oppression of animals. I also read, have you read Eternal Treblinka by Charles Patterson?
No.
He draws a parallel between the initial subjugation of animals and domestication of animals, and then men particularly thinking, aha, we can do this to women and children, and then to people that look different to us as well. And he sees it as the beginning of all oppression. I don't know if Carol says the same thing. I can't remember. She probably does. But I now, when I think back, I've always thought of myself as feminist, but how could I be feminist and not vegan?
That's what I always say. I always say, how can you be a feminist and not and participate in the oppression of other female bodies? I mean, it's, to me, it's that simple. We don't want to be oppressed, then we shouldn't be oppressing others.
I think to myself, I just think the shit will really hit the fan at some point, and people will have to change. But how much has to go wrong before the change takes place? We had the pandemic. Okay, it wasn't as dire as predicted. We could have worse. We have terrible manifestations of climate change, but people just carry on the same. I suppose we all do. I'm sitting here with my electric lights on. I find myself thinking, how bad must it get before change really takes place?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe that's just part of our human nature, is that we just don't want to really face reality until it gets in our face, to the point where we can't ignore it anymore. And I think people are starting to make the connection between all the flooding and the droughts and fires and things that are, these horrible situations that are happening around the world. I think people are starting to go, oh, maybe climate change is not made up.
Yeah, I think it's actually been recognized at long last.
That's like, what, 40, 50 years?
Oh, I know. Yeah. It's quite recent, maybe over the last 3 years or so, that the BBC decided that they had a policy of, for every climate change report they made, they would balance it with an anti-climate climate change report, and then they announced that they wouldn't do that anymore, that they, that it really was happening.
Yeah. Well,
But that was so recent.
Yeah, that's stupid. That's just idiotic right there. But is it so controversial, Everything's so controversial. Just saying that, I loved having your videos there too. Actually, I got a comment I wanted to tell you. One of my friends who came to the show, I made him watch your videos, and he was, well, he really loved your work, first of all, but he said how interesting it was that all of the animals in your videos have like their own individuality, like they're almost human in their expressions, that you could really see the character of each. They weren't just some random animal, I thought that was a very interesting.
That's nice to hear that. With a lot of the images, I purposely made the animal's eyes look out at the viewer, and I think that makes the difference. I wanted to depict the animals with dignity, especially in the Earthlings drawings. I mean, not necessarily the butchered pigs, you can't give them dignity. But yes, if it's a live animal, I quite often direct the eyes out at the viewer. I wanted to show them as not only with dignity, but beautiful as well. There is a certain beauty to some of them, even though they are tortured and exploited. I've even had, I've done a couple of open studios and included this work. Actually, that is a way forward to get your work shown. Once here in my own studio, and then at a friend's house, another artist. And there's one of a cow with broken, bleeding horns. It's again part of the Earthling series. It's called Tagged and Fettered, with the sort of thing that they put in the nostrils, to stop them suckling, and a chain around its neck. And a woman was looking and saying, "Oh, look at the beautiful eyes of that cow. Isn't it lovely?" to her friend. And I said, "Well, do you really know what's going on there?" And when she looked properly, she didn't like what she was looking at all, but she wanted to see the pretty cow or the pretty calf. So people really do bring down a veil of censorship, I think, when they're looking at things.
Yeah, it's like they almost project what they want.
The open studio here, I had 2 images of pigs, and a woman walked in with her children and said to one of them, "Oh, look, your favorite animal, a piggy," walked a bit closer and dragged him out when she realized what it was.
What was it showing?
I've done 2. One's called A Pig Dragged to Slaughter, and the other one is Pig in Hell. So it's kind of on a conveyor belt, going to be butchered. But yeah, I think if children were exposed to this, it would be a way forward. When I've done activism, street activism, parents drag their children away from the screens.
It's really sad. I think children, if you look at most children before they're indoctrinated, let's say, they have a natural love and curiosity about animals, and I think when we're little, we want to hold animals, we want to pet them. We're very in tune with that need, with that innocence. I mean, there's a shared innocence there. I love all your work. Like, you have so much work, and it's so there's so much to look at, like the different themes that you have, and just I'm just so glad there are people like you out there doing the kind of work that you're doing. I think it's so important, and I think what you even though people might not react to it, what you're doing is so important. And that's kind of the reason for this show, is to show all the work that you women artists are doing, that I feel like it deserves attention. It deserves a little spotlight on it.